What is up, MFers? I'm at the pool right back in the backyard today because we're doing a little pool demo video. The reason for the video today is you guys know that I love to throw giant swim baits and small swim baits, really swim baits of all different sizes and all different prices. And when I'm posting these videos, I notice a recurring theme in the comments, and that is a question from you guys asking, why would you go out and spend $200, $300, $400, $1,000 on a swim bait when there's $10 to $20 swim baits available on the market? A lot of you guys simply say, I could go buy a whole bunch of these cheaper ones. Why would I not just get a bunch of those cheaper ones instead of spending a bunch of money on a super expensive one? Well, if the proof wasn't in the pudding enough from catching some double-digit bass on baits that are this expensive from my last few videos, I want to show you guys in the pool underwater and above water the differences in the action of these two types of baits. And we're gonna go through a whole gamut of cheap swim baits that are available on the market and ultra rare, ultra expensive baits. And not only are we gonna show you the action, I'm gonna tell you how to apply each type of bait in what situation, when you need a super expensive bait, and when a bait like this will settle and catch you a ton of fish as well. You're not gonna wanna miss this one. So here's some of the baits we're gonna be using and comparing today for this video. We have baits that range anywhere from this little $10 cheap looking, knocking, rattling Amazon bait that you can probably get from numerous sources on Amazon or Alibaba or whatever, but this is a readily available one you can get for super, super cheap, to some mid-range baits like the 6 cents draw that I helped design that's in a $100 price range, all the way to this 11-inch, 9.5-ounce Hinkle Trout bait that has gone upwards of $1,000 purchased on eBay and other online auction sites. Now, one thing to note before we actually get them in the pool, and I'm gonna talk about this, is these swim baits are not only different in price range, but they're different in profile too. We're obviously gonna see the differences in action, but you notice some baits are shaped more like a shad, some baits shaped more like a trout, or just a random bait fish. I'm gonna show you why each type of bait works in different situations around different types of cover and for different fish a lot of times too. All right, so let's start with this one right here. This is the really cheap Amazon $10 bait. It's kind of a longer minnow profile. Like I said, not hard to find. You can get these things on Amazon and probably a lot of other places. And just for testing purposes, I'm gonna use the exact same 25-pound fluorocarbon line with a clip on all these baits so we can rotate through them really quickly. And that way we'll have the same control as far as line, clip, everything when it comes to action of these baits. So obviously this bait is not as big and heavy as these super giant Hinkle Trout, Hinkle Shad baits. But throwing the pool, you can see it does have a nice slow sink, so I don't hate that. And we'll start to work it back. I actually haven't used this bait before, but on a straight retrieve, you notice it doesn't glide very wide. And from the rattle purpose of it, super unnatural rattles, but rattles aren't always a bad thing. But if you kind of notice when you give this bait some twitches and some sharper snaps, it has a tendency to kind of want to dart up towards the surface. It's not a very smooth glide, and it wants to kind of roll over as you work it through the water column. These are perfect examples of characteristics of what a lot of the cheap glide baits on the market will look like if they're not tuned, and really there's not a lot of R&D put into these baits. You'll notice a ton of rocking back and forth from the tail to the head, rolling over, inconsistencies with sink rates and wanting to dart up towards the surface or down. But as you guys can see, a nice little photo finish paint job and not the worst action in the world. I still think you could catch fish on this bait, but definitely going to be less effective than some of the baits we show today. All right, next bait, I'm going to stick with the longer, more slender profile. We're going to start with those first, then we'll get to more of the shad shape. We're going to go to the opposite end of the spectrum to the biggest and most expensive and rarest bait that I own, and that is the Hinkle Trout swim bait. Again, this is an 11-inch, 9.5-ounce bait. So we got some specialty equipment we're throwing this. We're actually throwing this on a 9-foot rod. And you might be looking at this saying, how in the world did this bait, I think it originally retailed for $250 or $300 or maybe even $400, I'm not sure. But now you can't find one on eBay or other sites cheaper than $600 to Cole said there's one for $2,500 on eBay right now. It's absolutely incredible. So you might hear that and you're like, how in the world is it that expensive? Well, let's look at some of the characteristics of this bait in this pool, and you'll probably see why it can fool some of the biggest bass that have ever been caught. There's been multiple bass over 15 pounds caught on this bait right here. So you'll notice as this bait goes through the water, and there will be some discrepancy because we're only, 30 feet away from it in a swimming pool. These baits, these longer baits especially, act much better and much wider glide, more fluent glide, further away from you. You're never gonna be flipping 30 feet out to make a cast, but for reference, this bait, even though we're at this super short distance, still has not only a super wide glide, but a super smooth glide. There's no rocking back and forth, or not as much anyways, from tail to head, which is a telltale sign of a more expensive, more fluent swimming bait. This is a resin bait, so it is different than the last one, and a lot of ones we'll be testing today that are either plastic baits. Actually, we don't have any wood ones, so they're all plastic baits besides this one and the Hinkle Shad. But this one's completely silent, ultra smooth glide on it. Very lifelike detail, as you can see in the paint scheme. Lifelike plastic fins, tail, eyes are super natural, gills are natural. It has molded scales into the side of it. And I cannot wait to spend some time behind the rod and reel with this bait in my hand around some of the fish we have here, because like I said, it's fooled some of the biggest teen-sized bass that have ever been caught on a swim bait. And I think we can catch some giants on it as well. Now, before we move on to any more baits, let me show you something. Even on this bait, which is the rarest, most expensive swim bait I own, and really that probably I know of, this bait excels, and the longer, more slender baits excel on long bomb casts further away from you. These are not baits you're gonna flip into isolated pieces of cover or even work quickly through the water column to try to cover water. You're gonna make long casts over a point, a long grass point, a rock pile, over the top of a big brush pile or something like that, and you're slowly gonna work it back to the boat. The downside to the longer baits like this is when you have that bait on that wide glide and you give it a couple quick twitches, it loses that realism. It darts up towards the surface or darts down towards the bottom or rolls over. And again, there's discrepancy because we're not very far from the bait right now. It's only 20, 30 feet from us, but that is the issue with these longer baits. They don't work super well when you need to twitch it really sharp to get a fish to react next to the boat, or if there's a follower, you see them on Panoptics even 60 to 100 feet out from you. Love to give these baits a hard 2-count twitch when I have a follower on them, on that big wide glide. So I'll glide it super wide and then I go bam, bam. And sometimes these baits look decent, these bigger, longer baits, especially this one, but a lot of times they'll just roll over and those fish will stop following and stop being interested. But that is where this bait right here, the Hinkle Shad, which is more of a shad shape profile, as you guys can see, that it excels. Now, if I cast it out there, you'll see that it still has a pretty wide glide, about as wide a glide as I've seen from a shad shaped or a panfish shaped glide bait. Again, super smooth, not a lot of rocking back and forth when you pull it through the water column. Silent, very natural, same lifelike fins, scales, eyes, gills, detail. But one thing that sets this apart from the Hinkle Trout and the other longer, more cylinder type baits is when you're on that long glide, you get a follower coming up or you're just coming up next to a piece of cover, you can go pop, pop, and that bait will have 2 or 3 really nice back side to side quick twitches without getting super unnatural like the longer baits do. So for that reason, this bait excels in the same longer, further cast away from the boat, over the top of different types of points, rock piles, brush piles, stuff like that. It works great in those situations. Or you can come up to a laydown on the bank or a piece of grass or anything, flip it next to it, give it some hard twitches next to it and let that bait sit. Now I got it weighted because I like to get my baits down a little bit because I use forward facing sonar to target a lot of these fish, and for the most part that's deeper water and they're not 3 feet below the surface, so I like to get it down to them. But out of the box stock, this thing will actually slow float, so I can go snap, snap, and that bait will almost sit there in their face and not move, or it really will a lot of times if you get weighted just right. That's why I love and throw this bait a lot. They're $500 to $800 on eBay, and I don't know, I've caught so many good fish on this bait, including a 10-pounder the other day. So the next bait we're gonna take a look at is the River to Sea S-Waver 168. This bait right here is probably the most popular budget swim bait and really put budget glide baits on the map, which by the way, we are doing only single jointed glide baits for this today. There's a million different types of swim baits, obviously. Today, as you can see, single joints. But this bait right here is probably the most popular little glide bait, budget glide bait on the market. It's about a $19 bait on Tackle Warehouse, I believe. It's more of these slender profile baits. And as you can see, this bait is nothing special. I don't even know if it looks better than the $10 Amazon one. Yet there's been so many fish caught on this bait. It's got rattles in it, okay paint schemes at best. It has okay side-to-side action, and when you want to give it a couple quick sharp snaps, well, it kind of blows out a little bit. Darts up, whatever. But you can't complain or hate what works. I've seen so many people catch giant fish on this little bait. No mega giants. I don't think anyone's caught a 13+ pounder on this bait, but I think there's just been a ton of, you know, 3 to 6, 7 pound fish caught on it, which is probably due to people being more comfortable using it, as it's only about a 2 ounce or less bait. But nothing special really about this bait as you guys see it coming through the water, either on a straight retrieve with a, I don't know, it doesn't have a very wide glide. You give it some twitches and some action, kind of looks like poo, unless you get it just right. But people buy it, people catch fish on it. Now we're gonna go back the other direction, back to a more expensive and shad profile bait. This is the KGB Swimbaits Chad Shad. This is only about a 7-inch bait, 6 or 7-inch bait, but it's probably the most popular little shad-shaped glide bait on the market right now, and you're about to see why. Now this bait only costs about, I say only, it's only about $120 bait, I believe, but they're damn near impossible to get. When they drop this bait on the site, they literally sell out in like 1 or 2 minutes every single time. He sells a couple hundred of them. But if I throw this out to Cole, you guys will see on a straight retrieve, this bait has an okay glide. Nothing special really about it. Looks okay in the water, right? But that's not really how you're gonna fish this bait through the water column. This is more of a bait that you can either, one, you can cover a ton of water, blasting down the bank on a wind-blown bank, clean water, whatever, you just wanna get those fish to react, or two, you're gonna fish it next to a piece of cover, a lay down, a bush, a grass line, something like that. And this is how you're gonna fish it. Look how well this bait performs, the short twitches of the rod. Once again, this is a resin bait. I totally forgot that we had this one and I said everything else was plastic, but this is also a resin bait. But you can work this bait super quick with sharp twitches of your rod, or just working with your reel handle. You don't even gotta work your rod actually. And it has super sharp, erratic action. And even with those sharp turns where you're burning this bait and covering a ton of water, it doesn't have that unnatural rolling over action like the S-Waver or some of the cheaper baits have that aren't as lively. I mean, you can do so much with this bait. Really leave it up to your imagination, or leave it up to the fish's imagination. Again, this bait's totally different than the Depths 250 slide swimmer or the Hinkle Trout like you guys saw, in that it's not great for fishing over a long point or something like that, but fishing it quickly, it can do things and turn around and dart and have that nice even keel profile when you're fishing on a fast retrieve that those longer baits just can't achieve, and people catch a ton of fish on it. So this next one's kind of near and dear to my heart. This is the 6th Sense Draw swim bait, the glide bait that I helped design. We spent 3 years getting this right, and I caught, I don't know, 3 8+ pound fish this summer on this bait. I've probably caught over 100 fish on this exact bait right here. You can see from the hook rash and how beat up it is. But this is, again, one of the longer, more slender profile baits. So this is about a $100 bait, and what we wanted to achieve with this bait right here was the ability to have a nice wide glide, as wide or wider than any on the market at this price point, or even, I mean, this thing glides as wide as a lot of baits that cost twice as more than it, and it's about as smooth of action as we could get on this bait. It does have some rattle in it, kind of a little bit of a knock to it, and I fished this bait kind of similar with the retrieve as the Hinkle Shad, in that I will cast it far away from the boat, I'll give it long glides, and about every 5 or 6 glides, 2 short twitches, just as some quick action, gets those followers to react to that bait a lot of times. I don't know what it is about this bait. Maybe it's something that's kind of like the S-Waver, where it just flat out gets bit. I'm sure there's a lot of my detractors watching this video, you know, saying that I don't know what I'm talking about, or this bait's trash or whatever, just because they want to say bad things about it. But I don't think you can argue with the success that I've had fishing this bait right here. It's a damn fish catcher, and it really fishes well at slow to moderate speeds, and can really do well with some quick twitches worked into it. Kind of a hybrid between a shorter bait where you can give it some action and kind of twitch it and work it like a jerk bait the whole way in, like that Chad Shad, and a longer bait like the Depths 250 or a Hinkle Trout with that big wide glide that you can work over big pieces of structure or cover. And now for the aforementioned Depth Slide Swimmer 250. This is a $190 bait, so costs about twice as much as a 6 cents draw swim bait, but it's a bait that Butch Brown made famous out in California and kind of really started the big glide bait craze out there and maybe across the country eventually too. But this bait's a fish catcher as well. Another bait that's longer and more slender with a big wide glide. Sinks super slow, so you can stop that bait and it almost stops in a fish's face. Again, there's discrepancy because this bait fishes much better further away from the boat, so it works a lot better on a long cast. Has a much wider glide, kind of like the draw or the Hinkle Trout, as you cast it way far away from the boat, and it's going to work in the same similar area as those longer, more slender profile baits. And here again is where this bait is not as good for fishing small pieces of cover as the Hinkle Shad, or a lot of the shorter, more shad style profile baits. If I give it those long, wide glides, then I hit it with a couple twitches, it works a little bit. Doesn't look terrible, but it will blow out, it will roll over. A lot of times it will dart back up to the surface if you don't have one that's weighted just right. And this one actually doesn't happen to be one that's weighted as well as my other one that I usually use. But all in all, this is a great bait. I think I have 3 or 4 of them, $190 baits, so not super affordable, especially as a 6.5 ounce bait. You need more of a specialized rod than you do for something like a Chad Shad, or even the draw, which is only 4 ounces, but definitely a fish catcher. And a unique bait too. Hard plastic on the inside and has a soft plastic covering over it that can be removed as well. Next one up is a G-Rat Sneaky Pete. This one is back to more of the budget. It's very similar. I think it's $1 more expensive than the River to Sea S-Waver 168 and very similar in size, maybe a hair bigger. And this is another one that doesn't have great paint schemes. It's not super realistic, but it just catches fish. I don't know if it's the big forked tail or what, but the action on it is really actually impressive for only being a $20 bait. It's not gonna have as wide a glide as the 250 or the 6 cents draw, or definitely not the Hinkle Trout. And it's not gonna work as well on a fast retrieve as the Chad Shad. But for $20, I think it's a really nice combination between those two actions where you can work it kind of slow with a couple of quick twitches, or you can speed up your cadence and kind of cover some water with it with some twitches like the Chad Shad. You hit it hard a couple times and it's gonna blow out, it's gonna dart downwards. But for a $20 bait, the performance on this bait, if you want a 6 to 7 inch bait, is way more impressive to me than the River to Sea S-Waver 168. Another thing about this bait is super loud rattles in it, so might be a better bait if you got a little bit of stain in the water or you've just been fishing through an area with a silent bait, or you have super aggressive fish and you just need to put something big in front of them to target a bigger size fish. Last but not least, let's take a look at the Storm Arashi glide bait, which actually is like identical in size and length to the G-Rat Sneaky Pete. Both these baits, the G-Rat and the Storm Arashi, are about an inch bigger and a taller profile than the S-Waver 168. God, I got too many baits on my brain. But this bait's $36.99, so almost twice as much as the Sneaky Pete. And this is a bait that Brandon Polinick, Carl Jochimson have caught some really nice sized tournament kicker fish on. I don't know if I've seen a 10-pounder caught. Well, I think maybe Carl did catch a 10-pounder in practice or something, or Kayla did or something. I can't remember. But this bait for $36.99, I don't think has as good of action as the Sneaky Pete. And paint schemes are not great. They're decent, not great, about what you would expect out of a $20 to $40 bait. But the bait kind of tilts up and rocks up as it glides. Not super natural in that sense. I think it would have a hard time fooling a very large smart fish. But again, it's kind of a hybrid between the type of more longer, slender bait that's going to give you a big side-to-side action, and a bait where you can work it with kind of a quick cadence and twitch it, although it does kind of want to blow out or come to the surface when you give it some quick twitches. So I would say this is definitely leans more on the side of a cover bait where you're throwing to an isolated piece of cover, a dock, a laydown, something like that, to fish it around, give it some quick twitches and let it sit in their face. But I don't know, I'll leave it for you guys to decide if you think this is a $20 better bait than the Sneaky Pete and the S-Waver. Well guys, I know a $200 to $1,000 bait are not in the price range for everyone, but hopefully this video helped you understand why there's some discrepancies in the price and the rareness of some of the baits like these over here, and some of the fishability and the options when you only need a bait that costs as much as some of these baits over here. If you guys have any more questions, please drop a comment down below. I would love that. And if you want to see more pool videos like this, we got a couple more in the queue, so be sure to hit that subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching this, I'm out of here. Peace.